Yo, what's poppin'? So I'm back after about a week hiatus. Um, so I'm just gonna start right back in. Atlanta against London. Uh, so first, I actually did get about halfway through before I noticed my mic was not recording. So I was very sad, but yep, back in. We got two map fives coming up and a map four as well. So pretty long day of NA. Some pretty serious playoff implications for London, Atlanta, Washington, and Boston, despite Boston not playing today. They all had some pretty important matches. And yeah, so Atlanta 3-1 against London 2-3. This map ends up being a 3-2 victory for London. Maybe not what people might have expected. Not, I did not expect it. I thought, well, I didn't think this was out of the realm of possibility. I did pred about 3-2 Atlanta, I believe. So it's not like impossible, but not what most people would have thought. So new Queen Street coming in. London winning about 55 to 49, and Atlanta playing Kai, Nero, Hawk, UV, and OG. London playing Sparker, Backbone, Hottie, Landon, and Admiral. So a thing before I jump in, I guess, is Gator had tweeted at Hottie to do a Rhine mirror in this match, which he does twice actually. So be on the watch for that, but it is not this map. Uh, so Atlanta rolling out on their Soldier, Genji, Doom, Ana, Lucio, and London coming out on their standard Soldier, Mei, Ryan, Bap, Lucio. Nothing looking different for either of these two teams yet. So basically, Atlanta wins their fights off of very clean engages, and if the initial engage isn't great, then Atlanta will lose. So their fights are pretty much decided within the first few moments. While London win their more grueling fights, and they just kind of brute force their way through whatever Atlanta throws at them, even if they're like down a BAP, they will still push forward and still fight back, and they might end up winning the fight off of it. So when Atlanta win the fight, it's over very fast. And that kind of means that Atlanta don't get as much push during the fight because it doesn't last very long, and they can't really do that because they don't have the same cart pressure as Hottie on the Rhine and Backbone on the May. Whereas when London wins their fights, they're getting like progress throughout the fight because they have better cart presence and over longer fights. It leads to London gaining more ground per fight than Atlanta, and kind of winding down the clock, which is what they want when they're in the lead, which they end up being throughout most of this. So, yeah, London win the fights, and going on to Circuit Royal, where Atlanta win 3-2. So on Atlanta's offense, they're running a Hanzo, Bastion, Sigma, Zen, Bap, where London's running, I believe this is Soldier, Sombra, not May Sombra, but Soldier, Sombra, Ryan, Moira, Lucio. So once Atlanta's Bastion gains any purchase, London crumble. They did hold the first corner for about a minute before they got there, but then as soon as they lost it, the Bastion would push up to around the first point bend, and he was set up, and they gave him a window, and London just can't contest it. But London's rush very strong on the second defense. It's the second point defense. It's hard to walk up the hill into the Rhine comp as they'll just run down at you, and the Sombra not getting a lot done. Don't know what the goal was. Maybe they thought a Doomfist was coming up. It doesn't really make sense on Circuit Royal. But it does end up hacking Hawk out of Flex like twice. But other than that, I think a May would have been maybe more effective or something, not Sombra. I don't know. I didn't really see how it was working in the comp. Anyway, eventually Atlanta pulls up on third, and they hit a sick Immo Barrage play where Nero is on the Farah and he barrages by a window, and the Immo comes down on the windowsill, and you can't kill him, and he gets a lot. And while he's doing this, of course, Kai is shooting heads on the Hanzo, and they're doing a lot. And it looked kind of like it was planned a little bit. The Immo barrage looked very good. I wouldn't be surprised if it was something they tried to get done, and yeah, it almost looked planned. Moving on to London's offense, Atlanta running the Hanzo, Farah, Sigma, Bat, Mercy. against the Soldier, Sombra, Ryan, Bap, Lucio. Again, the Sombra's out. Not sure. And London really struggled to get past the first point. And eventually with EMP, which took 3 minutes to build, and some Sparker gaming, they cap it out in overtime. The second point, as it normally is, was very difficult, and they end up capping it in overtime, but definitely not great. Building up ults and stuff did not look pretty, and London actually make it through third pretty easily, and it looks like they'll close it out, but they can't because the respawns end up coming back. And it's really sad because they set up that fight very well. They had Sparker come in on a flank, and he took out Ultraviolet and looked very good, but London could not finish it out. Moving on to Midtown, which is a 2-1 victory for London. We get Venom coming in for Nero and Gator coming in for Hawk. I did not watch the first half of this map, to be honest, but Gator took the Rhine 1v1. He failed it, did not complete it, and ended up swapping over to the Winston in the end. But it was a very close map from what I did catch. I came down to the last fight, and yeah, Gator got the Rhine mirror he asked for, and he ends up losing it. It's definitely not what you want to see. Venom coming in with Gator makes it kind of seem like the Rhine was not as planned, because Nero should probably be in if you're playing Rush, which he does eventually come in, but definitely not what you're looking for. And no surprise that London ended up winning a Rush duel. Moving on to Ilios, we get Shax coming in for Backbone. And Lighthouse is at 100-55 for Atlanta, with both teams mirroring with Soldier, Tracer, Winston on a Lucio. So Atlanta's looking very strong. London ended up building like 5 ults, and he just 3 to take it, and then Atlanta just come back and win with their ults. But Atlanta basically needed no ults to get it to 96. They used like a nano boost only, maybe. And it was just the Venom show, because he had 36% of the team overall damage, and he was just putting on an absolute clinic. Shax could not keep up. Venom was doing a lot often. Runes ends up coming out to 100-0 for Atlanta. It's a Venom show again. And Atlanta's just not letting London into the Kickoff Clash or into the map, because this London needed to win 3-1 to have a chance to get in. And they end up winning 3-2, which is not good enough to get into the Kickoff Clash. So they're kicked out, and Atlanta needed 2 maps to get in there. So Atlanta's in, London's out. And as we expect, Atlanta is better than London on the Winston comps. We haven't even seen Atlanta play Winston that much. We did a little bit, but not that much. And yeah, kind of not surprised here. But going on to Colosseo, which is an 89-52-ish victory for London. Nero comes in for Venom, and Backbone comes in for Shax. And we get the Soldier, May, Ryan, Bap, Lucio duel that we wanted. This says Lighthouse here. Ignore that. It is Colosseo. So we get the Rush duel, that the salty run back even from Gator. And Sparker, off the first fight, hits a flank and basically wins the fight. He's doing big numbers. And he'll do this often when he'll live at the end of a fight, and he'll just hide in the back line and look for an opportunity to pull up. And Atlanta don't really go back to check him with their Lucio Soldier at all, and he just kind of chills. Hottie ends up diffing Gator often. There's a time where Hottie hits a 4-man shatter on everyone on Atlanta except for Gator, and Gator hits one back on London, but it doesn't really matter because Hottie got it off first, so he does more. And yeah, just pretty diffed by Hottie. Just kind of always positioning Gator how he wants them, kind of isolating him at times. And definitely a Rhine clinic, I would say. Hottie putting on a bit of a teaching show. It was pretty close, I guess. It wasn't crazy, maybe not that extreme, but as you expect, London's better than Atlanta at Rush. And Sparker is also doing way more than Kai and Soldier. Kai isn't really flanking much. He's just kind of staying with his team and shooting at the shield. And it results in Sparker getting way more damage and being far more effective and getting more value over the Soldier pick overall. Definitely knows how to play Soldier in that comp better. So overview, Pretty close match. Very funny. Gator asking for the rush mirror and losing it not once but twice. Every map was pretty close though, except for Ilios, where Atlanta, but mostly Venom, rolled very hard. And I'm not entirely sure why Atlanta tried to take the ego duel, because it felt like I thought at least that the outcome kind of impacted their standings, but maybe not, because the top 3 teams get to choose who they play out of the bottom 4. So unless they made them go top 4 or not, it didn't really matter. But I think it did. So that's a little interesting. And yeah, so top 1 player of the match going to go to HOU. Of course, huge work, big diffing, and really being the defining Spitfire playstyle and like the lead, setting up his team for success, making Gator go where he wants him to go. Great stuff from HOU. Of course, you can outplay a Reinhardt pretty easily in this meta, but it's okay. Writing that down for later. Moving on to Paris and Houston, with Paris being 0-5, Houston being 3-2. Coliseum being a 108 to 105 victory for Paris. Paris playing Glister, Wub, Vestola, Jujo, Khan. Houston playing Merit, Pelican, Piggy, Lastro, Iris. They're both mirroring the Soldier Reaper, Zarya, Lucio, Ana, which you will see Houston do throughout this game, and maybe the reason they end up having to go the distance to win. The Houston Zarya, they're definitely not as practiced on it, definitely learning it. Maybe trying to get it into their composition repertoire for the Kickoff Clash tournament. I'm trying not to be a doofus one trick, but if they're not up to snuff against Paris, probably, so you have to question if that's really the play. Anyway, Paris is looking in control since the first fight, and then they basically push it 105 or whatever to 20, and then they go back. It's like around the bend. It's pretty high up on the high ground, and they decide they don't want to take this fight here, and they go back to the Coliseum in like overtime-ish. It's just standard. That's what you see a lot of teams do. But Houston take this space, and they kind of run with it, which we'll see happen throughout this series. Houston gets a little bit of ground on Paris, and they just run with it. You give them an inch, and they literally take miles. It was kind of weird. It's like you give them the space, you give them the time, and they'll think of a strategy and they'll execute it. But unless you give them that time, they can't do it. They're incapable. So Houston eventually almost win 4 fights in a row to complete the comeback on the map, but they fail. They fall short, and they cannot win that 4th fight that they needed as a Wub Nano Blossom clears them out. But definitely a weird map, and it did look like Houston could maybe have made the comeback that we've seen maybe only 3 times, including APAC. Definitely not. Comebacks are not common on any maps. Any of the push maps, at least. Moving on to Route 66, was a 3-2 victory for Paris, which does mean they were up 2-0 in the series and let Houston come back in and eventually win it. No swaps coming in for Route 66. Houston offense, we get once again the mirror of Soldier Reaper, Zarya, Luciana. We also get that on Paris's offense, but Paris is looking very strong on first, and Houston squeaked by in overtime. Khan almost got a nano in time to turn the fight, but Vistola went down a little too soon. But it was pretty ugly from Houston overall, and they barely make it through the first point. And the same story on second, as they only really win off of a huge flank from Merit, getting a lot of value, and they're stopped short on third. So not great. You do get the 3rd point, but you definitely aren't looking great as Houston. And it's kind of the same on their defense, because Paris, they capped first once they built some ults, and Glister goes a little crazy, and they move through second pretty easily. And I don't know, because it looks like Houston know the goals of the Zarya comp. They know what they want to do, but they have a horrible time executing it and making it, like, deciding what they need to do fight to fight. It's just, there's some questionable rotations around the card, like on third. the cart is moving up to like the corner, and they try to flank all the way around behind them, but they still have a lot of distance between them and the cart before they can stop any progress, and they end up just dying before they can even get to it. It's just not, something's missing here, and their fight planning is not there. Something's off about this team. And Glister is still doing the Lord's work. Paris are winning a lot of fights off of him just popping off. And also, Vestola is looking better than Piggy on the Zarya, which you maybe don't expect, because Paris have looked pretty awful on the Zarya composition so far, for sure. Maybe they're looking much better, but definitely not like a good, definitely not good, really. Eichenwald, 3-1 for Houston. No swaps, and Paris and Houston continuing to play the mirror. And this map was eerily similar to the first for the most part. Houston barely squeaked by the first point in overtime. Paris pull up, and they're fighting basically on first point to defend second, and they're making Houston work for every centimeter of space. But as soon as Houston break that, they run it down and they cap the second point pretty easily. And it's the same thing for third. They're getting fought off at the gate for a decent amount of time. As soon as they get past the gate, they run through and they cap it out. So you give them any time to do anything, or they create any time to do anything. They look good. Like they look like the Houston we would expect from earlier in the season, maybe, where we thought they were a good team, or like a higher caliber team. But definitely not. If you have to give them that space to make them look good, it's not really good. Moving on to Paris's offense, they end up breaking through first because Houston invests a lot of resources into the Pelican Blossom, and it gets nothing. So Paris end up capping that point with 135. And Glister is still doing a lot. Pelican gets an exit frag on Glister, and Houston pulls up, and the grab clears them out, and then basically Houston stabilize and hold Paris on the second. So the offense, not great for Paris, only winning maybe 3 fights, I would say. 2 to 3. No, I'd say 3. They won like 3 fights. Not great. And Houston kind of stabilizing here. And this is where Houston decide, maybe we won't lose this game. And Dante comes in for Piggy. Dawn comes in for Vestola as well. And this Oasis is just a clean 2-0 for Houston. It looks like how maybe many people would expect the series to look. Quick 100-0 on Gardens. Pretty much stopped Paris from getting any momentum. The Doom looked much better than the Zarya comp. Paris, of course, looking much worse on the Winston, and I'm not sure why they swapped over. And Houston basically didn't need any ults to get this 100-0, and they ended the round with like 5. So definitely not what you're looking for from Paris. Kind of a step back from the previous maps in the series. And University, largely the same. Paris playing a Sombra, Tracer, Winston, Lucio, Ana, and Houston playing their Soldier, Echo, Doom, Lucio, Ana. Paris looked better on this map, with their dive actually being successful at times. But Houston are setting the tempo, and they're not really giving Paris much room to breathe. Glister Sombra looked largely ineffective, especially compared to his Soldier, but it was still getting things done. I think the Soldier would have done more, probably, but he was still getting some good frags, and he was still getting some key hacks. And he looked the best on Paris, as he always does. Moving on to New Queen Street, which was a 107-9 victory for Houston. Vestola comes back in for Dawn, looking to play the Zarya, and it's some kind of close fights, but Houston's coming out on top and taking the early lead, and then Paris are basically not getting any progress. Houston, anytime Paris wins a fight, they keep throwing themselves in and making each fight dry out as long as possible, so they don't actually get much progress. Even if it's a losing fight, they're just coming back so quickly, and they cannot get any real value off it, especially having Houston push so deep into the map. So the overview is Paris looked much better on the Zarya comp than they were, but a lot of winning fights were still coming off of the back of Glister doing a lot. And the Houston Zarya comp looked shaky at best, and the Doom comp still looks miles better. I understand that maybe they want to get Zarya as an option moving forward, but if their best bet of winning matches in the Kickoff Clash tournament next weekend, for me, I still think it's the Doomfist comp, and you don't. That's what you've seen the most success with. What you look the most confident on. You can't really prepare for next meta because there's going to be so many changes next stage. I assume maybe even a new character, maybe some massive tweaks, some reworks. Who knows? So I would say just stick with the Doomfist maybe. I definitely like their odds of taking maps or matches off of teams with it. But yeah, because when they aren't given, they don't have time to strategize or plan their fights proper. They just crumble, and when they can do it, they look well. They look good, but if they don't have that time and space, it's not great. Anyway, the Tomatin player of the match is going to go to Glister. Despite being on the losing team, I think it's the second time I've done this. I believe the other was Massa on Vancouver one time. But I truly feel as though Glister was the reason this game was so competitive. And he's doing so much for Paris, fight in and fight out. Even on the Sombra, he still looked the best. He still was a different maker. He's still doing more than his portion of the work. And he is fighting for his life out here, man. Please win a series for Glister. He's doing the most, no doubt. So yeah. Moving on to Florida and Washington. So Florida was 3-2 with a +5 map differential. At Washington 3-2 with a +2 differential, which is key going into the Kickoff Clash because at this point, the only two teams available are Washington and Boston to make it in, other than the other ones that have already made it. I believe with the teams not making it being New York, Paris, Vancouver, and London. So the last spot of who's not making it is between Washington and Boston. Washington guaranteed to get in if they get two maps. Unfortunately for them, they lose this match 3-1 to Florida. So if Boston 3-0 Dallas tomorrow, which seems unlikely, but it is in the realm of possibility, they will not make it to the Kickoff Clash. And they are not playing like they wanted or deserve it because despite winning this New Queen Street 74.62 to 74.61, they were heavily outplayed overall. Krillin did hit a fat nade off the rope to give them the first fight victory, but they're looking very uncoordinated and it was very quiet basically the entire time until the last 3 or 4 fights where Decay, he's been doing a lot really for Washington. He's been making a lot of space, forcing a lot of attention. He does more than that and he ends up killing a bunch of guys. And they start capitalizing on the space Decay is creating. And they bring the map back from 75 to like 20 meters, which is pretty significant. It's at least 3-4 wins in a row. And there was a time here, the very last fight, where someone dives onto Happy with Primal. But Happy hits a Helix rocket and hits a lot of dinks on him, so he does not get it off in time. And if he gets that Primal off, maybe Florida win that fight. And it ends up being a clean 3-0. But Washington ended up coming out on top off of some pretty hero plays, basically. Not off coordination, not off anything, just Decay, Happy, getting some pop-off moments. Which is what we've come to understand Washington to be built around and what they continue to try to be built around. But it's just not here. Florida proving to be a better team. I think I predicted this to be a 3-2 victory for Washington, but I am firmly not going to be able to support. I cannot believe in this team anymore until they actually show they can be coordinating and not just trying to win off pop-off plays. But I don't know. Sad stuff. Anyway, Gibraltar. I didn't even say who they're playing, but you know, Florida playing Checkmate, Hydra on someone, Animo, Surma Jed, and Washington playing Decay, Happy, Mag, Krillin, Opener. Yeah, it's what you expect. None, I don't think they ever make swaps. Watchpoint Gibraltar is a 2-1 victory for Florida. Happy's doing some happy things on the offense and Quillen hitting some nades, but Florida ended up holding out pretty strong in the second shuttle. Washington do a bit of a C9 as it looks like they'll win the fight on second and enter third, but they just don't touch the point. Overall, it's pretty hard for Decay to get much going on this second point on Tracer. The high ground is so hard to tackle, and the backline's so well protected, and Washington is stopped before the end of second. Moving on to the Florida offense, they make it pretty easily through first, and they almost steamroll into winning on second, but they don't quite. And Atlanta hold on a little longer, but Florida, not Atlanta, and Washington hold on a little longer, but Florida end up pulling through. And then Washington look like they're on the back foot, and Florida's basically regained the control they had almost all of map 1. And they take this throughout the rest of the maps, to be honest. Midtown being a 4-3 victory for Florida. Starting on their offense with the Tracer Soldier, Winston, Luciana mirror, which we've seen basically this entire series, with the exception of Watchpoint Gibraltar having the Briggs instead of Lucio and the Widows instead of Soldier. In typical Watchpoint Gibraltar fashion. Surmajet hits a big nade and they enter second with 5-10. Washington ends up messing up a dive, and then Florida enter third once again with 5-10. So Mag gets nanoed and he's like going for a jump, but it like messes up, or it's like he wasn't expecting a nano on the jump or something, and he basically gets nothing off it. And it's very sad. And nothing's really going on for Washington, and Florida's just kind of trucking, and they end up finishing the map with 240 on Midtown, which is extremely good. You might look at that and say, oh, they had 510, they only finished with 240. But Midtown third is extremely hard to break on dive, because you just set your Ana back so far that the dive is almost impossible to get to, and it's just very difficult. It's a very strong point. Florida just end up winning it. Washington not really in sync at all and struggling. Moving on to the Washington offense. We get the same compositions. Washington finally capped first after a while, but it's a pretty big struggle. Someone is cutting off the Washington backline, the front line, very well as they try to dive. And Washington basically only make it to third because Decay hits a back cap in OT, and he then like kills like 3. And Washington obviously very feast or famine on if Decay can deadlift in any way. Florida basically crumbled to Washington now. They look shook, and it looks like Washington's starting to gain some momentum. But Hydron stabilizes them with a visor. And someone, next fight, goes too deep with the Primal, and Surmajet gets cut out while trying to hit a flank nade, as Surmajet will do. And Washington end up capping in overtime, which means there's a possibility for draw. However, Florida have 2 minutes and 40 seconds to get a tick. And it takes them like a fight, but eventually Surmajet finds a big nade, and the dive comes out, and Florida take the map relatively easily, I would say. Moving on to Ilios. It is a 2-0 for Florida. It's the first well is decently close with the same mirror we've seen with the Tracer Soldier, Winston, Luciana. But Washington very prone to getting picked off early throughout this entire map, I might mention. And the difference between Surmajet hitting these insane sleeps and nades and someone juggling Mag into the pit, Florida end up winning out. There's a time where Surmajet hits a big sleep on Happy, who has a visor or a nano or something, and Surmajet is just shutting down these big hero plays that Washington are thriving on. And that's how they plan on winning. But Surmajet just shutting them down, and with nades or sleeps or something. And very frustrating to watch Washington. And moving on to Ruins, we get the Widow's trick coming out now into the Soldiers. And Happy is not doing a lot despite Decay distracting Hydron. So he's basically free to try and click heads, but it's just not happening. He's just not finding anything. And Washington find some kills, but Florida end up winning pretty easily and winning 3-1, meaning there is a chance Washington do not make it into the tournament. So overall, Washington win map 1 off of multiple hero plays happening in a row. That one with someone going down with the primal being of particular interest, as that could have very easily turned the tide of that map. The K is still doing work. I would say he did work in the backline pretty consistently, but there's just no syncage. There's no synergy between Mag and Decay, like almost at all. So the dives are out of whack. And I don't know why Anamo's here, but something about Florida now is Anamo is pretty much undetectable. Like I just don't notice him when I'm watching these things. And that maybe isn't bad, because with Sir Majed and Florida trying to refine their playstyle around his aggressive playstyle, and they've limit tested it now, so he's not getting caught out as much, and it's still very high risk, high reward, but it's there. Maybe it's good that you don't have a high risk, high reward Anamo or Lucio to maybe make that go further, and you only have one major liability on the backline instead of two. But it's just very interesting that with such a aggressive and such a activated backline that you don't get anything from Animo. I basically didn't notice him at all. I don't know, it's just very interesting, and it's very cool to see whether you're a fan of Animo's pacifist playstyle or not. And the automaton player of the match is going to go to the core member of that activated backline, Sir Majed. Still being the focal point around their playstyle, still delivering constant high impact sleeps and nades, shutting down the hero plays that Justice are playing for, basically, and also setting up multiple big dives for someone to checkmate on key points throughout the series. So yeah, that's it for me. I will be back to uploading pretty much every day. Stay tuned for APAC review tomorrow, hopefully. And there are 2 games in NA instead of 3, so I'll get those going as well. And I'll probably do some bracket previews maybe for the upcoming tournament and stuff like that. But yeah, so have a good one. Give it a like, give it a subscribe. If anyone asks what happened in Owl today, send them the video. Let them know what happened. And yeah, that's it for me. Deuces.